Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. So this is my first time chairing the board as Councillor Jeffries is unable to be with us today. So if I get a little bit confused with the formalities, just kind of be patient with me. So we're going to start off with apologies for absence. Miles?
Apologies for absence, Chair, have been received from Councillor Rosshaw, Councillor Graham, Stephen Moore and Councillor Jeffrey.
Can any members please highlight any declarations of interest?
Thank you.
No? And in terms of exempt information, there's no items requiring exclusion of the press and public today on the agenda. So Councillor Rosshaw has just arrived, so you've just had your apologies read, so we'll take that back in the minutes. So the minutes attached are from the 30th of May 2024 meeting, as this was the last formal meeting of the committee, as the previous meeting on the 11th of July was a private meeting. Can we agree to the minutes from the 30th of May? So, thank you. So the Chair's update, quite a significant Chair's update this time because it's starting with West Yorkshire highlights from the autumn budget. So West Yorkshire will receive a single settlement from 2026 alongside new local growth plans, continued UK Shared Prosperity Fund, though reduced, levelling up fund projects and sustained commitment to local transport and infrastructure. Cost of living, health and well-being. Income tax threshold will align with inflation starting April 2028. The Household Support Fund is extended with £1 billion and the national minimum wage will increase by up to 6.7% from April 2025, benefiting many in West Yorkshire. Transport. A significant investment of £1 billion for buses, a reaffirmed commitment to the Trans-Pennine route, additional funding for local transport and a continued focus on the West Yorkshire Mass Transit project. Housing, planning and regeneration. The Affordable Homes Programme receives a £5 million top-up. Councils retain right to buy sales and investment in decarbonising homes is increased under the Warm Homes Plan. We've also received a letter from Ukraine. So the Mayor recently received a letter from the Governor of Kiev, which outlines an interest in strengthening international cooperation between West Yorkshire and Kiev region in a number of areas. First is economic development and investment, fostering innovation, supporting SMEs and facilitating investment and business connections. Tourism, collaborating on tourism infrastructure. Education and science, creating student and researcher exchange programs. Culture and art, organising cultural events, exhibitions and artistic exchanges. Ecology and sustainable development, launching joint environmental protection initiatives. And also healthcare, enabling knowledge exchange. The ask is that we consider the proposals outlined and establish cooperation and partnership between Kiev region and West Yorkshire. Would anyone like to comment on the update? So moving on to item 6, governance arrangements. The report provides an update on the governance arrangements for the Place, Regeneration and Housing Committee as approved by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority at its annual meeting on the 20th of June 2024. Key points include the committee's terms of reference, quorum requirements and the appointment of Councillor Denise Jeffries as Chair and Annette Joseph as Deputy. Membership details and voting arrangements are outlined in attached appendices. Meeting dates have been confirmed for 2024-2025. This is the first public meeting since the annual meeting, offering an opportunity to note these governance arrangements for transparency. So the recommendation is that the committee members to note the update. So moving on to monitoring indicators. The purpose of this item is to provide an update on the relevant monitoring indicators and report on their performance to support the work of the committee. I'll hand over to Peter Glover for the update. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So within your packs, you find this item is covered from page 17 of the pack, and there's also an appendix that starts at page 25. So just building what the Chair said, the background to this is that we provide a regular update on monitoring indicators, and we've selected indicators that we believe are most relevant to the remit of the committee, and they're intended to inform discussion, and there are also links into subsequent agenda items. The indicators are mostly drawn from State of the Region and the West Yorkshire Plan. However, we do have an additional indicator that's considered in the current report relating to local housing allowance, and that reflects a request for information from the committee at a previous meeting. So reporting is by exception, so we're focused on indicators for which new data has become available since the last meeting. And what we're looking at this time are private rents, local housing allowance rates, house prices, fuel poverty, and a couple of indicators relating to digital infrastructure. And so very briefly, some key messages. So on private rents, we've seen a trend in recent years where private rents in West Yorkshire have grown faster than the national average, driven mainly by Leeds, but the level of rents is still well below the national average. Looking at the last year specifically, rents grew at a faster rate than inflation across the region, and also grew faster than the growth in average wages. And that was particularly the case in Bradford and Kirklees. So what we highlight in the paper is a cost of living challenge that trend presents, particularly for low-income households. At the request of the committee, we also provided an analysis of local housing allowance rates in West Yorkshire, comparing them with rental values, and you can see from the paper that there is a gap between the two, and sort of further commentary on that within the paper. Turning to West Yorkshire house prices, we can also see a convergence or signs of convergence between house prices in West Yorkshire and the national average. Leeds is now above the national average in terms of average house prices, and Bradford, Kirklees and Wakefield outpaced the national average with regard to annual growth in house prices in 23 to 24 year. We've also updated our estimates of fuel poverty. The combined authorities updated its estimates. This measures the number of households that spend more than 10% of their income after tax and housing costs on energy bills. So we've updated them to take account the latest energy price information for October. What we do, the big caveat that we do highlight is we can't factor in the effect of changes to the winter fuel allowance. But what we find is that the prevalence of fuel poverty remains above what was seen before the energy crisis hit in 2022, and the prevalence is also similar to April 2024's figure. So at nearly 27%, it's around 7 points above the national average. And then finally, turning to digital infrastructure, West Yorkshire continues to perform strongly. So we've got 92% of premises that have gigabit capable internet coverage in the region, and that's well above the national average of 85%. 83% have full fibre, and that compares with 70% nationally. And then finally, looking at 4G mobile coverage, 92% of premises have indoor coverage from all providers, compared with 86% nationally. So that concludes my summary, Chair. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Peter. Does anybody have any comments?
Thanks, Chair. I'll just make a quick comment, which is that this is really useful information, and the rent inflation is perhaps by some measures a positive thing for West Yorkshire, but I would say that the impact of rent inflation on housing demand, and in particular housing demand in social rented sector, means that we need to concentrate collectively on increasing supply of social rented houses, not just affordable houses. And a lot of the talk is about increasing affordable supply. That will reduce some of the pressure, but certainly in Kirklees, where I'm responsible for housing, it's social rent that we absolutely need to focus on. So I just wanted to make sure that was forefront. Thank you.
Ben?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight that fuel poverty data. I mean, it's astonishing, not perhaps surprising, but it's really frustrating that that's so high. And you know, again, I suppose it's a similar comment in terms of focusing resources and programs on upgrading and trying to tackle it, but it's incredible. Surely, that it's so high, and I don't think we can just hear it and then just go, gloss over it. Really, I don't know what we do about it. But.
Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and I think that it is a really big thing, and I know that, like in Calderdale and across the region, we're looking at retrofitting, and there's been a lot of retrofitting going on. And I know that so, I mean, I can only speak for Calderdale. I know that other areas of the combined authority region have some similar problems around the type of housing. Old stone terraces that are really difficult to insulate. And the retrofitting is really intrusive. So you might have programs of it, but actually that's really difficult. So I know that we're working with one of our registered providers to look at sort of retrofitting social housing as well, to help combat that, because obviously while that is positive for our climate goals, it's also really important in terms of reducing bills. We know that if you've got a well insulated house, it doesn't cost as much to heat. But it is really difficult, and I don't, so I think with all the retrofit, it's not quick to do though, is it? All of that retrofitting, and it's quite expensive. I mean, we have done quite a lot in Calderdale, but I think it's 10 grand per house plus. I think it's not a quick fix, is it? I don't know. Again, don't know what the solution is other than getting energy prices down.
Well, yeah, I think we just need to send a message back up to the mayor and back up to government that these, we need money to deliver new affordable and social rented houses, but we do need programs and big funding programs to sort out the retrofit. I think that's all we can ask, isn't it? Otherwise, it's not going to happen for those people in those types of houses.
I think I saw somewhere in the report as well that the retrofits are being affected by the lack of skills. So there aren't enough people to do it. So perhaps that's something that we can focus on as well, to try to get the skills up in the region so that we can do more. Sarah?
Because I'm a bit of a newbie to a lot of these committees, but I do sit on the economy committee, which is tomorrow, which is the new committee is, and it's an amalgamation, isn't it, of the previous business, economy, innovation and skills committee, I think its name was, and the employment and skills committee. So I don't know if and I know obviously that's only tomorrow, so it's quite short notice, but I don't know if this committee has a function where it can send reports through to the other committees or sort of ask questions for that to be looked at. because and that's the thing, isn't it? All of these things are so massively integrated. If you look at sort of economy, health, public transport, the climate emergency, everything is so intertwined and interconnected. But I mean, that was just a question really, if we can sort of officially do that on this committee.
Yes, we can do that. That's fine. We can pass that back, and we do look at the synergies across the committees. But we do also today have an item on your agenda at item, is it 11? Where we're going to look at the climate and environment plan, the emerging plan, and sort of share some of the information about the emerging priorities that are particularly relevant to this committee's agenda. So that'll be another opportunity to pick up that conversation about retrofit.
Richard?
Yeah, so Historic England, we're keeping a close eye on the kind of skills requirements with historic buildings, and we've just published a report in September on the kind of, I suppose, retrofit skills that are needed for doing historic buildings, because obviously there's an extra layer of insight that's required in order to do that. I could perhaps circulate that report around, perhaps go out with the minutes, and it might also be relevant for the skills meeting tomorrow as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. Just to mention that obviously that whole issue is interlinked with what's recognised as a tutor shortage in further education to be able to actually teach the skills that are required. I know we're ranging into the skills discussion, but just to say that there are those of us in the private sector working with Michelle and the skills team to sort of think about that as well, just to provide some reassurance that it's aware, we're aware of it and we're trying to get some action.
Thank you. Stephen first, please.
No, it's okay. It was just in relation to the fuel poverty in particular, and I think we talked previous meeting about outside of what it means in isolation, what's the result of that on things like the support structure, in hospitals, etc. As a result, because it's as stark as it seems on its own. When we talk about, or if we want to talk about justifying budgets for something or subsidies or anything else, understanding the wider impact of that has got to be vital, because otherwise we're just reporting it at one area and then we're not able to proactively do something with it somewhere else. Is it possible to get any kind of cause and effect data so we could say that 20%, how that might influence other services?
So I think a few meetings ago we had the same request, and we did produce a sort of additional analysis looking at trying to look at the health impacts as well of fuel poverty. So there is some previous information that we can refer to, but it's something that we can probably look at further in sort of conjunction with colleagues from the health sector on the public health side. But we did a certain amount of analysis. I think we found that in terms of the correlation between fuel poverty and sort of health effects, it's complicated by the fact that we've got a relatively young population, and therefore it's not reflected at the sort of aggregate level so much. But yeah, there was some additional analysis beyond that as well. But we can certainly look at that in more detail.
Yeah, I think that would be useful, even if it's just we've acknowledged this. So what are we going to do about it? From us as a committee perspective, as Ben's highlighted very articulately, it feels like, well, what do you need from us? What are we going to do as a next step for this, in case somebody raises that question, and at least closing it off and saying it can or it can't justify something else, I think is important. But thanks.
I'm going to go to Catherine next, because I know that you're going to talk about this specific point, and then I'll come to you, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, I'm Cathy Elliott, I'm Chair of NHS West Yorkshire. Apologies for being late. We did look at this data, didn't we? And we have got an example where we started about 2-3 years ago between West Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership and the Combined Authority and local government looking at fuel poverty. At the time, that began with a grant scheme, so really focusing on priority households. I think we can do something much more sophisticated now. We have, starting with us this month, a Chief Digital Information Officer to look across the whole of health and care, so that whole system, 10 trusts, primary care of dentists, community pharmacists and GPs, and I think this is an opportunity on how we can cross-reference that. So how is that therefore, I think the point you're making is, how's this turning up perhaps in hospitals and A&E up the road? How is this turning up for in GP surgeries? And I think there's something further we could do with the Combined Authority, between the NHS and the Combined Authority, looking at your home energy West Yorkshire, that home insulation piece of work, so the prevention piece of work, and seeing the spectrum of actions that need to come out of that. I think there's something I shared at a previous meeting about winter planning. We're always planning for surges in demand for services in the NHS, but I think there's also something around winter planning as well. And it's one of the reasons why I'm on this committee. So if we could take that as an action, I think, to work with Jen Connolly, who has a dual public health role with the Combined Authority and ourselves in the NHS. And I'd want to bring in our new Chief Digital Information Officer to see how we can combine the data that we've got to see what that tells us. But your point is, therefore, what action do we take on that? Because I know, I'm thinking aloud here, but our colleagues who are working on health and care in Leeds have a population health board. They focus on communities and certain families to provide support because they look at health data, but how do we lay this further information on as well? So Leeds might be, a population health board might be a good start to look at further action. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to go to Alex next, and then to Sarah and Richard. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just going back to the skills bit a little as well. I think one of the things you get sometimes as well with central governments is they go through a bit of feast and famine kind of approaches, where one government will announce a load of money, and then it can't be delivered on the ground because you ain't got planners to do planning things, or you ain't got engineers, or whichever sector it is that they keep doing. I think there was a short electrification of rail lines, for instance, a slightly bizarre one, but in countries where they just constantly have a general programme that runs like that, they've got the skills base, they do it efficiently and it all works. Whereas in Britain, one government say, right, we're all going to do it, they announce 20 billion, it turns into a quagmire because you haven't got the skills, you haven't got the experience, so we go, right, we're not going to do it again. And then 20 years later we go, let's go back and try it again, and they haven't got the steady state, and it's better to have a kind of constant theme. So I think probably for the Combined Authority in the Mayor, it's like, fairly sure Ed Miliband has announced a big retrofit scheme, but it's making sure that underpinning that, but it's not 3 billion just for the outcome or the output, as it were, it's for the skills, so that you have a steady kind of development of the skills sector as well, because otherwise it'll be harder to deliver on the ground. And on fuel poverty, just one little point, it'd be interesting as you break down those statistics. I remember we looked at, say, 20 deprivation factors or whatever at our local constituency in Bradford, in Shipley, and as you can imagine, it tracks fairly standard across all these different deprivation factors except fuel poverty, and that was the one area where the least deprived ward was quite high, because it was stone properties, large stone properties, where people might have been asset rich, cash poor, living in a big house that they couldn't insulate. And then how do you create a programme that picks that up? Because naturally, actually, if you've got very limited resources, you want to target on the most deprived area because that's where it's going to add the biggest value, but then you might leave behind an area which actually has quite a high incidence of fuel poverty, but it's in a less deprived area. That's a really tricky thing when you've got very limited resources, and it's not necessarily that we'd be doing it the wrong way to target it on those deprived areas, but it'd be interesting to break down those stats and just at least be aware when we develop programmes locally, I'd guess.
Thank you, Alex. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, maybe having, if we sort of are moving towards an aggregated settlement where we can look at, what are the, rather than go lurching from sort of project to project, which might be favoured, by the government of the day, actually, so if we can look at, through our individual authorities and then across the region as a combined authority, actually what are our priorities, what are our needs, and then fund those rather than be told, oh, you've got some money for this, and then scrabble to find what are the projects that fit it. And I think because so, for example, I know that one of our recipients of UK SPF funding, and I can't remember if it's from Pillar 3 or Pillar 2 off the top of my head, but they've been going in. It's a quite a small organisation. They've been going in retrofitting old buildings with sort of, for want of better words, sort of more sustainable technologies, and going into sort of old buildings. But they've been running those as courses, so that they're sort of delivering the skills and they're teaching those sort of people. So they're providing retrofitting for sort of a community centre or whatever, whilst also teaching people how to do that. So they're sort of upskilling as well as delivering. But that's because they've been able to sort of mould their project to that bit of funding that came in, and actually which is great, and that's a really nice project. But actually, it'd be really good for us to be able to say what is it we need, and then can we fund that in the different ways that we can, and then we can be creative about the different ways that we fund it. I mean, I think I've just lost my notes by pressing the wrong button there. I think also though, looking at just sort of like around sort of just looking at the sort of private rents and stuff. I think that the current analysis on private rents maybe would benefit from a sort of a more precise assessment of changes in the supply and location to guide future housing policy. So at the moment, apparently, and maybe colleagues can help with this, small landlords are reportedly exiting the market due to legislative pressures, reduced tax incentives and high maintenance costs, but it's unclear whether their properties are then being sold to owner-occupiers or to larger landlords. I think in Calderdale we're gathering data with council tax colleagues to track the tenure of changes, but I just think it'd be really useful to know what is going on in order to help shape housing policy.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I'd just like to come back on Kathy's point, if I may. Really, I think it's really interesting. I suppose starting we had the conversation that started off with the impact of fuel poverty is sort of a poverty context. Then we kind of moved on to health impacts. But I just wonder if there's more that this committee needs to do just to really sort of work out where we want to be going with this, because a lot of the retrofit is very much focused on terms of net zero. But I mean, I think I've been really heartened by the combined authorities' work around just creating better homes for people. I think that point comes back with the health impacts, doesn't it? Because fuel poverty can have an impact in terms of damp homes, which can lead to respiratory diseases. It could lead to older people being kind of just sort of cold and unwell and so on as well. So it feels like it's quite a nuanced conversation here, and I think there are all sorts of ways in which sort of better homes can make people better. It'd be interesting, certainly from the health point of view. I did wonder if there's any statistical analysis to see what kind of health is sort of home-related health issues are coming through, and whether there are any differences across West Yorkshire, even given the quite varied and different kinds of housing stock that we've got in each of the local authority areas.
It'd be interesting to see the effect of green space on that as well, and how that affects people's health. Any more, Ben?
Very quickly, I think Councillor Courtney had a useful question. I mean, I think anecdotally, I think the private landlords are selling to owner-occupiers because the institutional investors obviously want complete blocks. I think the larger sort of private landlords, or amateur landlords, for want of a better expression, I think they would prefer houses, and the legislation around Building Safety Act, ground rents, is absolutely killing, and tax is absolutely killing that sort of amateur landlord market in the flattered sector. So take like Leeds City Centre, for instance. I think that's the issue. So people will take houses to rent, but not so much flats, I think.
Kathy?
Thank you. So I agree. We can. It's a piece of work we started. I think we need to go back to looking at respiratory disease as you outlined. We've just done a focus as NHS West Yorkshire on childhood asthma as well, and the need for more asthma-friendly schools, which then obviously aligns with what councils and the mayor is working on in terms of clean air initiatives. So we can take that away, and if you haven't quite been tracking what's going on in the NHS at the moment, one of the big shifts from the new government is around neighbourhood healthcare. So I think this aligns so well. We've got lots of great examples in all your constituency areas of how neighbourhood healthcare works between the voluntary sector, local authorities, social care and the NHS. But we're trying to bring together a framework of how the best practice is established, and then people in their communities can take that away. And it was a big announcement from the Secretary of State for Health and Care yesterday about neighbourhood healthcare being a priority. So this aligns really, really well strategically. But to your point, they need to take some action about this as well, rather than just admiring the problem. So I think it's a good opportunity for us at the moment. Thank you.
Tamsin.
Thank you. Yeah. it's a really interesting discussion, isn't it, as well, about actually the value of investment and what investment can do to address some of those particular challenges. So some of the work we're doing within Homes England around social values. So social values now one of our key performance indicators. So we've got a programme of research led by our economists with MHCLG around how can we capture the benefit of a number of different interventions. So whether that's remediating brownfield sites, we recently did a piece around older persons accommodation and capturing the benefit of that to be able to make the case for investment. And I think there's something really interesting that we should be exploring further, and I can have a conversation with our economists to see is there something that we're doing around what's the value of investing in housing and regeneration to health benefits specifically, and how can we capture that and then use that as a part of the case for investment, more investment in housing and regeneration.
Thank you, that'd be really helpful. Any more questions, Sarah?
Sorry, I've got a question that's just sort of, and it might be, well, I'm sort of guessing that this isn't being monitored because it's not part of the remit of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, but I don't know if it would be useful as a monitoring statistic, just in terms of sort of like, you know, if we're looking at a more holistic way, but anything about homelessness and about people who are not, you know, who are finding themselves without homes. You know, we're talking about housing, we're talking about the quality of housing, which is all really important, but I just wondered, how does that fit in? And I know that so obviously as local authorities we have responsibility for housing homeless people. That's not a West Yorkshire Combined Authority function. I get that difference. But does that sort of, as a stat, not have an impact on homes delivery?
Katie?
So we are doing some work at the moment with the West Yorkshire Homelessness Forum to explore options for a role that the Combined Authority might play in that. I'd say it's probably fairly early on in that process, but there's a lot of interest in exploring what role it could play and how these factors sort of interplay with each other.
Thank you. That's a great conversation. So moving on, so the committee to members note the messages from the indicators. So moving on to item 8, housing delivery. The purpose of this report is to update the committee on housing activity following its approval of the West Yorkshire Housing Strategy. The report updates the committee on existing activity and outlines the option for future activity. I'll hand over to Katie Kavanagh again for the update. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll take the paper as read, but I'll provide a brief summary and then pass on to Patricia to update on the Brownfield Housing Fund. We're at the midpoint in the committee cycle, and this paper is an update following the private session back in June. The past few months have brought about a series of significant changes affecting housing delivery. The proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework would bring about an increase of approximately 15% in housing delivery targets for West Yorkshire. And alongside the budget announcements already discussed, there were also welcome announcements on changes to right to buy and a potential rent settlement for social housing, which may help increase the certainty for social housing providers to plan their investments. All this all times with us moving into the delivery phase of the West Yorkshire Housing Strategy, setting key tasks and milestones that we can measure our progress against over the next 3 years. One of our key areas of focus is delivery against the Mayor's pledge to deliver 5,000 affordable homes over the next term. According to data collected from the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership, there is a robust pipeline of affordable homes across the region. However, at the moment, only around 2/3 of the target of 5,000 homes are secured. The report details some of the key items of work relating to housing delivery, including affordable housing studies for each local authority, which feed into some of the proposed actions to boost delivery. I'll work on viability assessments and the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is supporting progress towards investment and delivery on 39 sites, which equates to over 11,000 homes, of which around 2,900 will be affordable. A series of options for further work are outlined in the report, and we would be happy to take views on these. However, they will need to be need to form part of a wider conversation on resource and capacity. I'll now pass over to Patricia to provide update on the Brownfield Housing Programme.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as you will know, the £89 million Brownfield Fund is the only capital programme the Combined Authority has for delivering homes. It was to bring forward new homes on developments of brownfield sites where market values prevented the schemes from coming forward previously. The Brownfield Housing Fund is now in its 5th and final year. The report highlights that, at the time of writing, the Combined Authority has committed funding for 28 projects, which equates to over 5,400 new homes, including 1,830 affordable homes. The programme is currently on track to exceed the minimum target of outputs for homes set by government. However, achieving the maximum spend target has always been a challenge due to the stringent criteria set by government for the fund, along with impacts of economic conditions onto the private sector market. Discussions are ongoing with officers from MHCLG and for potentially around flexibilities of the funding in this final year. In parallel to that, detailed discussions are also being discussed with Homes England on a transformational project for the region, which, subject to government response, will start to move things forward through the assurance process. So I've got on Brownfield, if there's any questions.
I've seen you put your hand up, so it was almost, I wanted to come to you, Andy, with a question in a way, in that I think the biggest challenge over the last year for affordable housing delivery has been kind of the health of housing association budgets and what they're feeling able to deliver with where funding's been at. I get mixed views speaking to housing associations over the last month of where they feel they're at now post the budget, and you know that you chair the group. I'd be interested to see what your view is on where you think people are standing in terms of capacity to deliver coming into this last year.
Okay, yeah, happy to come back on that. I think it is mixed. That's probably why you're getting different responses. I think it depends. I think all associations are in a slightly different place. I think the larger ones are probably in a better place. The larger ones like ourselves are probably in a better place. So we haven't slowed down. In fact, we've accelerated our new home delivery. I think probably Yorkshire and Together and a few others are probably in a similar position to us. But I think smaller associations are feeling the squeeze, and it's kind of highlighted in this paper. Actually, it talks about the trade-off, which we talked about earlier, between improving existing homes and building new homes. I think most boards want to do more of both, but there's a realism to that. How much money have they got available? I think the announcements that are highlighted in this paper, is it 3.6, are all really positive actually. So additional 500 million top up for the existing affordable homes programme. I mean, I'm guessing that's national, isn't it? That's national.
That's national, yeah.
I mean, it's helpful, so nobody's going to knock it. It probably doesn't equate to that many homes actually when you start to break it actually down and look at it regionally. But it's got to be welcome. But I think the government have indicated that that's kind of the start, and that as part of a more comprehensive spending review, likely in spring, that there could be more. So it could be more over a longer period of time. And I think that's what associations need. It's a longer term certainty that a programme will give. So 500 million, of course, is welcome, because I think some associations, particularly smaller ones, had started to slow down their new build programme. That might enable them to keep going in the short term, but what we really need is kind of certainty up to really 2030 now, because when you start looking at a scheme today, it probably takes 3, 4, 5 years before you're really going to actually deliver anything on the ground. I think the other things that this talks about, right to buy receipts, that's a step in the direction. I think most associations would say it probably doesn't go far enough, because when we talk about delivering of new homes, I think somebody mentioned last time we were here about Leeds had a record year in terms of delivering affordable new homes last year, 2,000. Their net position was 2. So there are two extra affordable homes at the end of the year than there was at the start, because they'd lost 1,998 effectively through right to buy or right to acquire. And that's what matters. That's what gets people off the housing list. It's the net additional, not I've built you one here, but I've taken 6 away over there. That's no good to anybody. So we do, it's very controversial, because it's, everybody, the people who benefit, there are individuals benefiting from the right to buy, but if you're talking about the supply of affordable homes, then it's not a great policy. So I think we probably in the sector think that needs to go further, but this will help. And then the final thing around the rent settlement, that makes a huge difference. Every association's business plan will be really sensitive to the rent increase. So I know ours, we'd assumed up until the government's announcement, we'd assumed that we would get CPI plus 1 till April 2026, and then only CPI after that. Now the government have announced, they're going to do a consultation. Once that position is confirmed, we will adjust our assumptions. If we adjusted it for CPI plus 1, just in the period from 2026 to 2030, it had something like 40 or 50 million to our 40-year business plan. So, and if that's for us, imagine what that'll do nationally. It pales into significance the 500 million that's available through the. So, certainty around the rent settlement is crucial. So all those things, there's nothing really further to add, but hopefully that gives you a bit of context as to why those things matter. The question I was going to ask was around the brownfield land programme, and we're saying it's in its final year. I know a lot of associations have benefited from that, and you mentioned the numbers. Is there anything planned beyond that? Because again, we're going to have stop-start if we're not careful. We'll all stop looking at brownfield sites and looking at greenfield, and none of us really want to do that. But we just wondered what's been said to government about continuing that.
We're currently in discussions with MHLG about future potential funding, but there has been no commitment as yet. But there have been in discussions that something, and there is always that brownfield first approach that's been given on that, but also should any future funds be devolved to us, that might be able to, under the single settlement, that also might be able to make funding more flexible and for our own local needs, and change the approach that we've been given on the brownfield one.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Thornton?
Yeah, thank you. I've sort of got 3 sort of questions on different areas, if that's okay, so I'm sorry about that. And I'm not apologising, that's why I'm here, isn't it? Firstly on the Housing Accelerator Fund, so I know Coldsdale we secured nearly £800,000 worth of grant funding, which is brilliant, which increased our capacity within the planning and housing strategy. And the growth team has provided really invaluable support to the delivery of the garden communities which are coming up, and it's supported disposal of council-owned local plan sites, including the North Halifax Transformation Programme. Is there any chance of the fund to be extended further to support the delivery of housing within Coldsdale? We've got no internal budget to spend to unlock housing sites, and therefore the HAF and previous housing revenue fund have been crucial to supporting housing delivery in Coldsdale. So that's my first question. Shall I carry on? Shall I go with all 3 and then you can come back to me? It's up to you, Chair.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So the next one is the options for further work, and that's my sort of comment or question around that is around packaging sites for viability purposes. So in Coldsdale we mostly have sort of smaller sites. Obviously if we can package them together, that helps with viability, because that's more attractive to housing providers, especially sort of large developers and RPs. Which means then that we can get the smaller sites delivered if they're packaged together. However, that causes greater management operational costs as well. So it's sort of good to have them together, but actually it is more expensive for us than just if we just had one site. So it increases the complexity of the scheme delivery for us as a local authority, and therefore the costs. So the North Halifax Transformation Partnership Programme was an example of that, with 3 sites packaged together. So it did appeal to a large developer. So just sort of would ask for sort of financial support for management of those sorts of things, of sort of packaging sites together, if that's possible, in order to allow us to allow us and other local authorities. Obviously, it's not just Coldsdale, but other local authorities are going to be in the same position. And then the third thing was the Brownfield Housing Fund. We had a real challenge. So we've got one really good site where we got £2.1 million worth of funding from the BHF. It's progressing well. We've got a nice, efficient 122 unit apartment building with 60% improvement in carbon reduction beyond latest regulations. That's great, but we've had some real problems with land around the sort of land value cost ratio, the cost ratio benefit, and it's been a real sort of limiting factor on the amount of grant that a scheme could receive. So Yeah, so on-site affordable housing was found to be unviable on some areas. So we'd support greater flexibility in how this criteria can be applied, and then also we've had some problems with the identification of brownfield land and what the definition is within the National Planning Policy Framework, Annex 2, and it meant that a site that had been previously developed and had historically contained extensive areas of housing ended up being defined as a greenfield site in the local plan because it had to stick within PPF. So despite being able to evidence that there was development previously, it didn't meet the criteria. So I guess is there a way that we can, that the combined authority can help shape that in order to make sure that we're not losing out on those sites that were brownfield, that were really brownfield, but then reclassified as greenfield. That's
Katie,
it.
thank you. Over to you.
So probably taking the first 2 points together, because I think they're probably fairly interrelated. We would like to see an extension to the HAF programme, and part of that involves developing an evidence base to demonstrate that there's still continued need for it. Projects like the sort of packaging of sites would theoretically fit quite well within that, and it's certainly something that should be sort of discussed in the round with the local authority teams that are working on this, and we have asked for some of those options to be put to us so that we can have that evidence base there, appreciating that at the moment there's no commitment to an extension on the programme. I don't know, Alison, if you wanted me to say anything more on that, but
that covers it for now. There's nothing further to say at this point. I think we are in conversation about how we prioritise future funding, given there are so many competing pressures. But yeah, the evidence is what we need in order to be able to make the case.
I'll pick up the queries about brownfield. The challenge of land values around the region has always been raised, and we've raised that from the first year of the programme with central government, and the issues around the BCR, which was set by government. That is not being allowed to change, but they have listened and have assured us that they have taken on board that for future funding, and the impacts of that. I think we'd still have to achieve something potentially at a programme level, but there might be that small flex within to be able to do, to look at those issues. But yeah, Hans, this is what I was mentioning earlier about the constraints that have been given us to deliver within that programme. Again, if future funding's devolved to us, we'd have more flexibility in terms of establishing those rules, hopefully, depending on how the money's being given by government. The issue regarding what is deemed brownfield, yes, it goes with the policy NFP, and I fully understand, and that has been, again, one of the issues that's been raised centrally with government on that, and I believe that, looking into that sort of greyfield kind of policy, which is that low quality that we know underneath the ground there is contamination, there's pipework or whatever else is existing from previous developments, but unfortunately because of the criteria of the fund currently, we have been unable to fund those projects. Again, if funding was given, or we've got more flexibility and have a combined authority funding, we could look to establish those through various other different mechanisms and funding pots, so it might be that we can create those depending on what's being given in a single settlement in the future.
Thank you, Patricia. Councillor Crook.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'll just very quickly repeat my concern about social rent versus affordable, because when we talk about loss of homes to right to buy, a lot of that is the social rented component, and if we're looking at a net increase of 2 homes in Leeds, for example, in affordable, we've lost that particular segment of the housing market, which serves the most vulnerable in our communities. In Kirklees, so the maximum right to buy discount was £85,000 before it will be reduced to £24,000. We're yet to find out how that will impact receipts from sales, whether that will stop right to buy receipts or whether we will actually gain some revenue that we're able to do something with is a moot point. But the question I wanted to ask really was around the Brownfield Housing Fund. It says in 3.37, should future capital funds be devolved as part of single settlement, our ability to tailor programmes and so on. What I want to know is, can we ensure that programmes that we subsidise or fund adhere to higher performance standards compared to the national minimum standards? So I think you've mentioned in one of the developments that you've got a higher environmental standard in the new build, but I think if we could West Yorkshire wide ensure that we are going to a higher standard than the national minimum, that would be one thing. But also I want to talk about the performance gap, because the way that building control works in this country is to look at the plan and say you've planned to meet a certain standard and not test that after construction. If you look at things like the Passive House standard, that's a post-construction certification system, so it ensures that that performance is actually achieved. So I think even if we weren't insisting on a higher standard, if we insisted on a different certification scheme in West Yorkshire, we would have in effect get a much higher standard out of the building that we subsidised. And I think that particularly speaks to the fuel poverty point that was being made earlier by Ben, as well as our environmental obligations, and does not in any way need to be an impediment to delivery, because if you're just ensuring that a standard which is already stipulated is actually being achieved, you can't have a higher cost imposed on us through applying that standard. So that was my question really, can we do that?
For future funding, that would be up to the combined authority, if there was funds available to establish the parameters of that particular fund and what that was used for, whether it's for viability issues. As we all understand, the more criteria you put on something, the greater the viability, so therefore the more public sector impacts that will go, or funding will go into it. But then that would be for the combined authority to agree that for that particular fund. In terms of monitoring and standards, when we give funds, it's on a specific basis, so we would expect that to be, and no changes to that either in future. So we can look at that depending on what the fund criteria is that's given to us from either government or within the combined authority.
Thank you. So before we move on, I just wanted to kind of, sorry, Ben.
Hi, thank you. I've just had a couple of observations too. So I was looking at from sort of 3.23 onwards around the viability models, and declared a bit of an interest here. Obviously, our business seems to be involved in a lot of viability of development nationwide, and I suppose it's just an offer really, just to say, you know, do reach out to other organisations. We've delivered training. For instance, I was down in Oxfordshire last week delivering training to 16 planning officers down there. I do really support the idea of the database, and there's things that have been going on in that sector as well, because a lot of what we're talking about, whether it's delivering infrastructure or better quality homes, the jargon's about land value capture, you know, using the public policy to share that uplift in land value. And what we're not good at in this country is having a database. So it's not just the appraisal inputs generally, it's actually having a proper land database. I know there was work, we did some work, pitched ideas around using artificial intelligence to help scrape that data and create these databases. The planning authorities have a lot of data within their systems, but it's all held in PDF format and so on as well in a lot of cases. So there are things that can be done. We pitched that to Homes England and the Cabinet Office with RECO. So RECO do big, machine reading type projects and things that you can do these days. So do reach out. I just wanted to pick up about the Housing Accelerator Fund as well, because well, I suppose the Brownfield Housing Fund, in the sense of to what extent are some of these funds looking to engage the private sector as well as, I suppose, just the RP market as well, because reading the report, it does sort of come across as though there's money being spent delivering schemes in partnership with RPs, and I just wonder to what extent going forwards, you know, we'll be able to target any capital funding for private developers as well. You teased us a little bit with the transformational project from Homes England as well. So, you know, what does that mean, for instance?
Katie, do you want to respond to that?
So in terms of the Housing Accelerator Fund, it's a revenue-based fund that was initially targeted at local authorities and led by those sort of housing delivery projects from a local authority perspective. In order to try and really target it on affordable housing delivery, we expanded that to registered providers as well. Bearing in mind it's a limited fund and we're already essentially it's fully committed at this point in time. So and there's projects continuously being put to us from local authorities and from registered providers as well. So there's limited ability there in terms of private sector. On the Brownfield Housing Fund, I'll pass over to Patricia.
Sorry. The Brownfield Housing Fund is approximately, just doing a quick calculation, I think 2/3 is private sector. Most of our engagement is with the private sector. And it's about, because in West Yorkshire the majority of land is owned by the private, brownfield land is owned by the private sector. So yeah, we've actively engaged with them and with their agents, and our name is now being circulated around a bit more, so we're getting a lot more approaches about bringing those store sites into...
Is the programme full now, in effect? You know, is the programme full? Will there be more calls for projects?
So we're in the final months of the programme. It ends in March. You have to be on site by March 25. So theoretically, yes, the programme is full. We've got a large allocation, as mentioned, a transformational one that's currently in discussions with. It's not a Homes England project. It's working with Homes England in that particular one, and we're discussing with government as well regarding whether or not that's a major priority for them. So that will hinge on a lot of that.
Thank you. Councillor Lennox?
Thanks. I just something regarding viability in Leeds that we are starting to do is we've brought some flexibility in with our benchmark transfer price, which means that RPs can. Sorry, something's freaking out on that screen. RPs can make higher offers to developers for Section 106 homes, which obviously helps viability for the developers in delivering those. We've said it's provided that the percentage of affordables in our planning policy is met, and it's relatively new, so we'll see how it impacts. But it's something that we would look at bringing in on all new developments, and when we're looking at developments of scale, it's something that we hope we'll be able to just address, go some way to address some of that viability challenge for developers. So maybe we'll bring back findings from that.
Thank you. And one of the things that I was thinking about when I was reading through the documentation was about, we're talking about stock here, but what about the actual rents and the people who are going to live in these properties? How can we make sure that what we build are actually truly affordable? So some of the shared ownership, for instance, have got management fees that are ridiculous, and those are service fees that can be escalated without legislation or without. So just making sure that we keep an eye on the management fees, keep an eye on application fees, keep an eye on when we're talking about private rents, landlords taking people's deposits. Like, how can we make sure that we make sure all of that is considered in all of this as well? So, Councillor Courtney.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think Ben, with the money that we've had from HAF, it's been largely working then with, not exclusively, but with private, like investors. It's not just registered providers. But my question was going to be, it was just really on what Councillor Crook said about, and when he was talking about who makes the decision, about the decisions that can we say, okay, if we're funding schemes, can we hold them to, can we sort of ask for environmental outputs, for example, to be of a higher standard than the national average? And my question is, who makes that decision? So is that a decision that's made by us in this committee? If we're going to hold, have that as one of the outcomes, or is that a decision that's made by the combined authority main, committee. I don't know what it's called, the Combined Authority Committee. That's the leaders and Tracy. But so yeah, who makes that decision? And can we? And if it's not us, can we influence it?
Is this regarding brownfield capital funding? So that's
I suppose. I mean, it goes across the board a little bit. It's like if actually we want to say, if we're going to be providing investment. I'm trying to use the word investment rather than subsidy on lots of things because actually I think that's a better way of framing it. So if we're going to sort of provide investment into creating housing, and we want to see that, to be held to a slightly higher standard, it's like we want that to make sure that, from a environmental point or sustainable point of view or insulatory point of view or whatever it is, we want to have a sort of can we make, if we're investing public money in that, can we make sure we have a good standard? Who makes that decision about what that outcome is?
With regards to the criteria that was set for Brownfield Housing Fund, we are unable to do that because it's set and it's to do with additionality and how the funding is used, and we can't put, because most projects come to us after the planning stage, it's the criteria that sets, so we can't imprint more. We did look into if we could then find funds from another project to add into that to ensure that things were then either more carbon, but that's again where things cross over, and one of the great impacts of that was the BCR. And the impact on BCR. Also, there's the Affordable Homes Programme, which is to purchase 10 years, so that there's a lot of complexities to it. And unfortunately, the way the Brownfield Housing Fund is, we couldn't do that, but we did look into it at the beginning of the programme to see if there was a way that we could either have higher carbon. When a scheme has gone through and it's a preferred scheme and it has fully high carbon, we will do everything we can to make sure that we meet those criteria and help to ensure that that preferred scheme goes forward, if that gives you any comfort.
So if we're sort of moving in the future to sort of have an integrated settlement, then is that something that and we have maybe a little more control over sort of how money is spent? Is that something that then we could look at?
Yes, I would hope that would be something that, as a combined authority, we have greater flexibilities of the different funds that we might be able to create and different mechanisms for delivery models that we could do.
Ben?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just add to that? I think it's really important, obviously, to have the high standards. I'd say it's really be helpful if there's then clarity around how far beyond, if you like, building regulations one wants to go. So, for instance, the 2025 Part L standard is quite high and actually will result in quite energy efficient homes. Obviously, you can go further, net zero and so on and so forth. But it's a cost. That's my point. A cost balance. And do you then say, well, we want to go all the way to net zero, but then maybe we have to compromise on how much then social rent is in the mix, or even how much of the programme gets spent on the retrofit, the thing that we were talking about earlier. Because if you're living in a Part L 2025 standard house, it's going to be pretty efficient compared with a leaky old stone terrace. So, whilst I wouldn't discourage the thinking, in just be cautious about limited resources and how it pans out across the whole piece.
So the last point from Tamsin, please.
Thank you. It was just really to confirm on Councillor Crook's point around the 10 years and the importance of social rent. We had a letter to our chair from Matthew Pennycook, the Housing Minister, which set out kind of 7 immediate priorities for the agency in the new government, and one of which was asking us to take steps to ensure that the agency maximises the number of social rented homes within the remainder of the Affordable Homes programme. So I just wanted to make that clear in terms of that government request under the existing programme.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation is for committee members to note the contents of the report and consider options for further activity outlined therein. Moving on to item number 9. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an update on the strategic sites and regeneration focus work that is being progressed by the Combined Authority through the lens of the emerging local growth plan. The report is structured to reflect the spatial approach to the local growth plan, which identifies our major urban centres and the corridors of opportunity connecting them, providing updates on how emerging delivery model thinking and work associated with specific programmes such as the Investment Zone programme are driving progress across the region. I'll hand over to Hannah Andrew for the update.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I'm going to take the paper as read and just provide a short introduction. As stated, the paper provides an update on strategic sites and regeneration focus work currently being progressed through either directly or with support from the CA. We've structured the report around with a place-based focus rather than by programme, with links to the emerging local growth plan drawn out in the text, including in relation to the spatial focus in that plan and priorities for growth. The paper provides an overview of the strategic sites we are currently actively working on and interfaces across programmes highlighted. So within the local growth plan, the SPAs remain with the local growth plan building on these through identifying how our major urban centres are connected through three main corridors and areas of economic strength. Identifying that by investing in our urban centres and the transport corridors that link them, we can maximise the impact of our investment and drive economic growth through dialing in on productivity. We've got the plan representing that spatial approach from the local growth plan on the screen. We haven't been able to share that previously because it is an emerging policy document, and I can say that a draft of the document will be shared with members following this meeting, either later on today or tomorrow. So the corridors are described as following. The Western Corridor is a major transformation of the city centres of Leeds and Bradford that can be connected via mass transit and improved rail connectivity, with further rail improvements linking Halifax's growth potential on to Greater Manchester. Projects in the corridor include the West Yorkshire Investment Zone, which is linked to the Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust and Leeds and Bradford's universities, Bradford City Village, Leeds Transformational Regeneration Partnership and the regeneration opportunities in the Southern Gateway, and housing-led opportunities in the Halifax Town Centre and the North Halifax Growth Zone. There's a southern corridor that reaches south from Leeds towards Huddersfield and then on to Greater Manchester, drawing in Dewsbury and the garden communities in Colesdale, and the major regeneration and economic opportunities driven by housing growth. And the projects in this corridor can include the West Yorkshire Investment Zone, this time focused around the National Health Innovation Campus in Huddersfield, Dewsbury Riverside and the residential opportunities in Dewsbury Town Centre, garden communities at Thornhills and Woodhouse in Calderdale and Bradley and Kirklees, Clifton Business Park, and investment in the South Bank area of Leeds. And then there's the Eastern Corridor, which is between Leeds and Wakefield. There are already good train connections here, which can be strengthened to link the wider corridor and on into South Yorkshire, supporting development in Wakefield Centre and the surrounding areas. And projects around this corridor include regeneration and renewal in Wakefield City Centre and the Castleford Growth Zone, Langthwaite Enterprise Zone and the CA's development of an extension to the Langthwaite Business Park here, and key employment opportunities around Ferry Bridge, Skelton Grange and the Air Valley. So I'm going to leave it there and open the floor to questions, and I do have some colleagues around the table who will help me with that, because there's a lot in the paper in terms of projects and a lot of people working on those.
Any questions, comments? Councillor Burton?
Yeah, thanks. I guess a question more around changes with the NPPF coming in and probably having three, sorry, you knew this one was going to come, didn't you? Probably about 3 of the authorities out of 5 having to go back into a local plan process based on the numbers forecasted. How does that match with here? Do you see it as an opportunity for additional growth and just a way to build on what's already here, or do you think it's a bit of a having to manage that process as it goes forward, I guess?
Yeah, I think obviously housing growth is very much on the agenda and is very much seen as an opportunity for economic growth. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we do need to work through. At the moment, those changes in the NPPF haven't actually been formalised, so we're not expecting that. I don't believe now this side of Christmas, but At the point that they come through, yeah, we'll be working with partner authorities to understand the implications of that. And we are already obviously having those conversations, but it's very early stages for me to be committing to exactly how that will pan out and where that growth would go. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, just to sort of say that it looks really great, sort of diagrammatic approach, and support it fully, and it'd be great to get it rolled out. And I suppose what was going through my mind is this kind of form the basis of a future SDS under the new NPPF. Presumably you're talking to government about the SDS sort of opportunity, and also I just wondered whether there's any scope within any of these projects that we've got to sort of engage in the kind of the New Towns programme as well that the government are bringing forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, again, I would say from the point of the SDS, yes, it is a live conversation, but it is very early stages. We've got no regulatory backup on that in terms of understanding exactly what that would mean for the region. But certainly, in terms of, sorry, I've just lost my train. What was it? New Towns. Yes, sorry. Yeah, that was. I think for the region, we see the opportunities really very much as aligned in the local growth plan as being around our existing urban centres and the regeneration and densification opportunities there, rather than specific new towns at this stage. But this sort of chimes with that as an approach.
I think I was just saying I'm aware of other areas where sort of even sort of kind of brownfield, what you might call urban centres, existing centres, they're still pitching in. They're not thinking of it as it has to be sort of a green field, pilot in a new town. So yeah, I think there might be an opportunity there.
Councillor Rushall?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ben. That's exactly what it is, isn't it? So as long as it's contiguous sites, it can be an expansion of an existing urban centre. So it's called New Towns as a headline, but we'll look at, for instance, Southern Gateway in Bradford. Could that work around the new station to create that density for government? So I think that's spot on our approach, unless I've mangled it there, but no, I think that's right.
Yeah, no, I was going to say exactly the same thing. So we are quite clear about where the growth potential is within our region, and so we are trying to respond to the opportunity around new towns in that context. And so, as Councillor Rushall has said, there are significant at-scale opportunities within our existing urban areas and urban centres. So that's the conversation that we're having with government.
Councillor Courtney?
Yeah, we really welcome your continued support of Clifton Enterprise Zone, which hopefully we'll get there eventually. Just noticing on the map that I'm not quite sure if the Elland Station dot is actually on there. So it won't be there yet because obviously we don't have the station yet, but that is still, obviously we're just making sure that hasn't been left off. That we're still that's still sort of in the pipeline for sort of, because actually with the and as you've mentioned, we've got our new garden communities there coming up there, and actually having more rail services in that area is something wanting to sort of encourage people to be using rail. And with my transport hat on, we're already having, because even though those aren't going to be there for a few years, starting to look at whether we can increase the number of trains that come through that line, because actually having one train an hour that services Brickhouse and then Elland is not any use. It's not, and also connecting us up with Huddersfield, for example, or connecting up through sort of like round through Leeds in that way, actually having greater. So and I know that obviously this isn't the Transport Committee, but actually I think having that push across, that joined up approach and that push across is also useful to work towards. We're all working towards the same goals, and having that connectivity for employment, for business, for people, for leisure, for tourism, all of that. Thank you.
Stephen?
Hi. Yeah, I think probably just two things. One is an overlay for this in terms of, you mentioned connectivity, digital as well, and the future sort of expansion plans across those routes and those areas, and not just fixed line but mobile as well, because a lot of certainly the routes and mass transit is a particular example, having a broad infrastructure for not just gig but beyond, now that the industry's moving on, but also making sure that all of the local authorities are releasing their assets in a cohesive approach, so you don't just get a route that has great mobile, but then you go to the next authority and they don't allow fixed assets onto council assets. So that was one part, and then the other one was probably just also same with power, by the way, and some of those strategic sites to see what power infrastructure is also available and being upgraded. And then the other one was just in terms of skills, because I know we've picked it out in this report and we've talked about it, but it still does concern me, that sort of CITB indicating lots of challenges with skills broader, and even putting pins in there and saying where are those training facilities, who's providing the skills that we need to deliver some of these projects. So I just sort of put that in as a highlight and an ask as well, to be an overlay on the map.
Cathy.
Thank you, Chair. Something we discussed in the private session in the summer was looking at the NHS capital priorities and infrastructure plan, and we had a follow-up meeting between, and Alison was part of that, with the combined authority colleagues and NHS colleagues on looking at how we can see where we've got things in common, and also have an overlay of the NHS plans on that map as well. So it's work in progress, and there was a reference there to Leeds Teaching Hospital. They are still awaiting a decision on national funding for the redevelopment of their children's and adults hospital up for Airedale Hospital, covering Bradford District and Craven. They've had their capital funding confirmed in principle because of the RAC issue that they have. Both of those hospitals being major developments, and we have fingers crossed for Leeds Teaching Hospital that they'll get their national government funding. I'd really welcome that cross-referencing on transport, and I know you said there's not a transport committee as well, but it all connects obviously. So those are, I suppose, two developments. We do have a mental health hospital investment in Bradford as well, less so about transport links, but that's also a major piece of investment coming into the region. So I just suppose I wanted to put it on to this meeting to say that we've agreed to do that mapping exercise on spatial priorities of general infrastructure, particularly for us in looking at the priority investment needs for general practice, for GP surgeries and clinics to take forward as well. So we've just had an analysis of that. So, but I'll follow up with Alison and Jennifer Conley afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. Just an initial reflection of it's really pleasing to see the coherence of the what's important in West Yorkshire and what's being driven forwards. So really supportive of that. And actually, I was just pondering on whether this is going to be used in a more kind of promotional kind of sense, because actually sometimes I think we observe that there isn't a lot. Let me word this properly. We see a lot of activity in other places, other cities, other regions, promoting what's going on. And for me, I haven't always got the coherent sort of sense of what's happening in West Yorkshire to be able to. And I'm, I think we're all part of that effort to sort of put forward that message about West Yorkshire's brilliant. There's all this great stuff going on. Come and invest, or come and base, and I was just wondering if there's any sort of thoughts of how this will be used as a tool towards that sort of seeking investment and promoting West Yorkshire.
We might have to take that back, Lisa. So
sorry, I know I
well, no, it's partly because we have structured our paper to update you around the work on strategic sites around the growth plan content, but the growth plan content and how it's being driven and used is being led by others. But I would like to think so that part of the reason for having a coherent growth plan and for spending the time trying to articulate some of that spatially is so that we can better communicate those messages. So the answer is yes, but how we're going to do that and what the plan is to do that, I'll have to come back to you on.
Councillor Courtney.
It's just a teeny tiny one, and it's not meant to sound facetious, but but the large dotted line that's sort of going sort of from Leeds, Pudsey, Bradford, and then it goes sort of like Hebden Bridge, and then it sort of drops down, sort of past the motorway or whatever the blue line is. I'm just wondering why it's sort of like going down to Manchester that way and not sort of going through. So the train line through the Calder Valley line goes through Todmorden and then down to Manchester. And I'm just wondering why that dotted line sort of drops down, sort of short of that sort of western bit of Calderdale, which is sort of Hebden Bridge, Todmorden, that sort of area. I'm just wondering why, because I'm not, you know, I mean, I know it's just a line drawn on a map, and I know that it's not, probably doesn't actually have any significance, but actually, if you live in that is actually taking out quite a large part of Calderdale, and it's sort of quite an important economically sort of quite important part of Calderdale. So I'm sure it wasn't done deliberately, but I would just say that optically that's making me twitch slightly.
Thank you. No, I think that's useful feedback. We'll take it back. I'm assuming it tracks to Manchester Centre, but I don't know. So I'll ask our GIS colleagues and we'll see if we can adjust it. Thank you.
Still, Thomas, are you going to say? We're left outside.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments? Nope. Cool. So the recommendation is the committee is asked to note progress with strategic sites alongside the spatial approach outlined, which reflects thinking in the emerging local growth plan. So moving on to item number 10, local remediation acceleration plans. The purpose of this report is to provide information on progress towards a local remediation acceleration plan following the publication of the final Grenfell Tower inquiry report. I'll hand over to Katie Kavanagh for the update.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is intended to make the committee aware of the work the Combined Authority is being asked to do in relation to these local remediation acceleration plans to support the work of local government, local authorities, the Fire and Rescue Service and other regulators in addressing buildings affected by unsafe cladding and to make them safe. The Deputy Prime Minister wrote to all Combined Authorities in September, and a copy of the letter is appended to the report, which provides the context to what is being asked of us. This is not an area that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority has had a role in previously, and we are currently doing what we can with the resources that we have. We are still getting into some of the detail and getting to grips with the particular barriers that are contributing to some buildings taking longer than they should to be addressed, although some of the key barriers are outlined in the report. What is clear is that the regulators have defined responsibilities, and we need to establish in partnership with those regulators what the role of the Combined Authority could and should be given the right resources. It is likely that we will be playing a convening role, bringing together multiple stakeholders and holding them to account to ensure that we are collectively doing everything we can to ensure buildings are made safe in the long term for their residents. We are working up a draft of the plan at the moment, which is expected to be shared with MHCLG at the end of the month, and we're meeting regularly with partners and MHCLG as this progresses. We'd welcome any feedback or suggestions, particularly in regard to any key issues that should be highlighted in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Comments, questions? Andy?
Yeah, it's just a question, and I just appended to the bottom of that is a letter that was sent to Tracy on the 13th of September, and it does say in there, it asks questions somewhere in there about I'd like to hear thoughts on what immediate steps you could take to increasing the pace of remediation and also what barriers. And it asks for a response to be sent by the 27th of September. So I'm just wondering, has a response been sent and what was kind of said in that response?
So we weren't given a huge amount of time to reply to that. So we had some initial meetings with the local authorities to gather their thoughts, given that they've been a lot closer to this issue than us. And off the back of that, we outlined some of those barriers and some of the things that we could do initially. Most of that was around convening meetings and the barriers that were then listed in the report to the committee as well. So that was kind of it as a first stab, but there have been subsequent meetings since then to sort of share that information.
Thank you. Question? No question? Okay. So the recommendation then is for the committee is asked to consider the feedback from the local authority partners and provide any feedback on the barriers to progression or suggestions around any key issues to highlight in the preparation of the plan. Moving on to item number 11, climate and environment plan. The purpose of this report is to provide an overview of the areas of the emerging draft West Yorkshire Climate and Environment Plan, with particular reference to areas that are relevant for this committee, and getting feedback from members on the draft framework and action areas for the plan. I'll hand over to Noel Collins for the update. Perfect timing.
Thank you very much, Chair. Afternoon, everybody. So I'll take the paper as read, but just kind of reiterate some kind of key points related to the report. As you've seen, this is, you're all probably very much aware of the target that we have in West Yorkshire in terms of the net zero by 2038 target. So we have that target kind of, and the Declaration of Climate Emergency underpinning a lot of what we do. We've made good progress, as you'll see from the first appendix, related to activity around that target over the last kind of 4 years or so, the last mayoral period. And that was encompassed in our last kind of plan. There's a huge range of activity there, from transport-related activity through to things like nature recovery side of things. Won't have failed for you to notice that the existing plan runs out at the end of this year, so there is an immediate need to look at the next plan and what that looks like for the next period. So we are now very much, as you see from the paper, looking at what comes next and the shaping and the framing of the next plan. The idea, as you've seen through the paper, is that is a long-term plan out to 2038. So the framework that you see in the paper is that which kind of structures what we will be hanging our climate-related activity on over the period up to 2038. So we hope that that kind of fits requirements for the long term. But the other aspect of it is very much around what we do within the next kind of 4 years, very much aligned to the mayoral term. So as you've seen, there's a framework there. I won't go through that, but that's very much linking to what we already have in place in terms of the West Yorkshire Plan and our previous kind of ambitions around the climate agenda, and very much kind of tries to look at 5 specific areas in which we have influence and control as local authorities and combined authorities. Very keen as part of this item to kind of get your feedback on those kind of that framework itself, but also kind of the activity areas that are documented with Appendix 2. So, Chair, I will hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Courtney.
Thank you. So you've asked for feedback. So it's great. There's clear ambition for specific mass transit projects and insulation of all social housing by 2038. But the plan is a bit more vague on setting goals for progress in areas that local authorities or partners might lead. For example, decarbonising the public estate, and for all. So. I think we'd be keen for this to take a whole building approach. And could we set a similar ambition to that stated for social housing, for example? So, for example, could the plan be to commit support and help to enable all public estate to be net zero by 2038, for example? In terms of the new duties for nature restoration, and that's brought a strong focus onto agriculture and farm engagement. How can this be delivered in partnership is a key question, I think, to maximise partner strength. So the roles for partners throughout the plan, including business partners, could perhaps be more clearly articulated. So there's just a bit of a stronger focus on that. In terms of adaptation and resilience, they also feature with the combined authority intending to progress risk assessment and a regional plan. So could the Combined Authority have set out a need for further work on net zero finance and wish to scope Combined Authority's role as a potential investor. Business models and governance is a critical issue for many net zero projects. Collaborative shared work on this as an area would be very valuable. And I know there's just been an announcement, hasn't there, around pension fund consolidation. I don't know if that will end up playing into this at all. I don't know. That was just on the news this morning. I heard about, whether that will end up being a sort of potential source of finance for these sorts of projects. What else? Combined Authority, you're articulating some policy, ask for central government, for example, the government to equalise levies in gas and electricity bills, and I think we'd be keen to see each strand of action to actually have a specific ask, so maybe a little bit more detail. I think I'd also advocate that the CEP should quantify the scale of the carbon and nature challenge to help focus attention on areas or projects which can deliver most benefits. I think, like Alex was talking earlier about, you go for the sort of highest gain first, but I think focusing attention on areas that can develop the most benefit, for example, in carbon terms, the biggest challenge is finding ways to progress heat decarbonisation and reduce single occupancy internal combustion engine vehicle numbers. Community engagement is an unclear theme, and this will need to be resourced to enable bottom-up and community-led shifts on the ground. And I think this is particularly important at the moment, where we're seeing a lot of negative feedback from people who shouldn't really be, shouldn't be complaining about people being given more choice and actually public investment into sort of alternatives. But I think there is quite a lot of that sort of stuff on the ground. We're certainly seeing that in Calderdale. I'm sure people are seeing that in other authorities as well. So I think that community engagement would be really welcome for us to have support around community engagement, and I'm sure that colleagues would agree with that. 2 more points only. In terms of biocrops, it might be good to see if this has this come from the farming community, because I know that biocrops can be a bit of an emotive areas for farmers and green campaigners. So, like, how much have farmers sort of actually the businesses on board? And finally, in terms of sort of planning, so in Calderdale, the planning rate increasing new housing build standards can be difficult. More support with that sort of area. That's my list. You did ask for feedback. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Noel, do you want to feedback on any of that?
Thank you, Chair. So much to go out there, but first of all, thank you very much for the kind of the feedback there. I think we are at that stage of developing the plan, which means that we can take all of these things on board. So really welcome kind of that input. Just to pick out a few things there in terms of points you've kind of raised there. Just to reassure on the public estate side of things, that's very firmly within the remit of this. Obviously limited space within the report to kind of mention everything, but it absolutely is within our thinking, because we do absolutely recognise the fact that that is one of the areas in which we have much more control as kind of local authorities and combined authorities. So it'd be silly not for us to kind of look at that side of things. In terms of the finance side of things, if we can just kind of pick on that one as well, I think we're not wedded to any kind of model or anything around that financing piece at this moment of time. We are very much looking at the makeup of that. What could it look like? Where would the funding come from? So it's still very early stages about what that would look like, but the ambition is there to have something which does support projects to move forward through that project development into implementation, and obviously help us get to where we absolutely need to. And then just in terms of, you talked about kind of the biocrops element. I understand from colleagues they've done quite a lot of engagement, partly through the local nature recovery strategy kind of activity, but also individual engagement to get to this point in the climate environment plan that has informed what you've seen there. So there will be kind of feedback there that is taking that on board a little bit. But again, just to say thank you so much for your input.
Excellent, thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. I think just one observation in terms of the solar. Do we cover off discussions in terms of the priority areas and areas where we might be developing and areas where we might be putting solar in? Do we have network discussions with the DNOs, so the power companies, to understand that if we put solar on that, they could actually take the power that's generated? The reason I ask is just somebody mentioned, this is anecdotal, it's not, I'm not saying that it's everywhere, but somebody said that company tried to install solar, they got consultants in to do the work, to evaluate them, and then they went to the power company and said, well, we can't take that. And that was just a sort of red flag to say, that layer needs to be on it, because our ambition needs to align with other ambitions. So it was just a point of note.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely. So Northern Power Grid, as the kind of the distributed energy operator within the kind of, who operates the wires and things like that within West Yorkshire, is absolutely engaged within the process that we're doing. So they're very much aware of that strategic kind of conversation. There is obviously an issue, which I think we may be all aware of, in terms of the queue of projects that are out there to connect to the grid. There are moves afoot, and I think there's been announcements kind of this week or last week around making that queue system a lot quicker. So we are very much aware of kind of pushing to do that at a kind of national level as well. The other thing to kind of note, which might help with those conversations, is around our local area energy planning work that we're actually doing, which will look at West Yorkshire through kind of that spatial energy lens. So looking at where is the most appropriate places to locate various different technologies, working out how the grid can cope with that, and trying to understand those issues where there might be capacity constraints for a solar farm, for example, in a particular location, and how upgrades would need to happen. So we're trying to develop that understanding and evidence of actually where this work will work better, where we might have blockages and those types of things, so we're better prepared for conversations that might happen in the future.
Thank you. And can I just say that is a really good story in itself then? We were talking about how we set ourselves up for success and how we talk about the stuff we're doing. I think it feels like that probably needs something that could be shared, with businesses, shared wider, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy? I wanted to profile the West Yorkshire Health and Care Partnerships climate change strategy as well, which is led by my colleague Frank Swinton, and it's particularly to align decarbonising the public estate. So Noel, I don't know if you're working with Frank at the moment, but I would really recommend that so that we can complement each other. And also the point on clean and green transport as well. We know the NHS is contributing negatively and positively to this issue and agenda. So I think a conversation with Frank I'd encourage to then align those two strategies, and also how the NHS as a major employer and manager of estates can contribute to the plan as well. But I can introduce you if you don't have the details. Thank you very much, Kathy. Any more comments? Councillor Conley?
Yeah, could just what you said there about the NHS and about sort of clean transport. It's actually just made me think. I went to a session earlier in the year that was talking about sort of air. Not really, I suppose, from a climate action point of view, in terms of sort of the decarbonisation from that sort of perspective, but actually just the fact that air pollution is such a major cause of poor child health, for example, and also adult health, but really for child health, and that sort of having that focus on the sort of the health benefits you know, and I think someone earlier on sort of mentioned, you know, there are you know, it's been mentioned earlier on that there's multiple sort of benefits for different things, and actually we need to sort of map out some of those cost benefits as well, I think. And it's really notoriously difficult to sort of, you know, monetize the sort of the benefits of good child health, but actually, you know, we can, but those things are really important, I think, as well, to sort of and I think can help in terms of investment. You know, if we're looking for investment or looking for buy-in, actually, you know, if people are feeling grumpy about you know, the fact that their local authority is pushing a active transport, you know, for example, agenda, and I might have a few battle scars that I speak from experience on here about this, but actually, you know, if we're reframing it in terms of, well, you know, okay, so we're offering choice, and we know we want to invest in public transport because we're offering choice. It gives people more choice, but also it means that air quality is better, and that's better for our children, and it means that people can get to work better, which is better for our businesses, and it means that we can reduce inequalities because not everyone can afford to run a car, and it means that you know, it's better for wildlife, and you know, there's all of these different things that are so important and so sort of like interlinked that actually, you know, I think but yeah, so I suppose what the point is just about making sure that some of those outcomes maybe are captured as well, I think, for the benefit of everyone.
That's a really good point, and I guess to say that as part of the kind of evidence-based work that underpins the climate environment plan, we have a section of that kind of looks at the co-benefits of all climate activity. So that, just to reassure, that's very firmly within that, and what we will try and do is kind of move that kind of theme through as we move into more kind of detailed development activity.
Yeah, and also Vision Zero as well, because obviously that's a really important priority of the mayor and the deputy mayor as well, isn't it? That the Vision Zero is sort of getting rid of serious accidents or, you know, deaths and, you know, through road traffic sort of stuff, and that's another, getting people into public transport is another benefit. That's another benefit.
That's fine. That's really interesting. I think the garden communities that we talked about in the last point would be a really great data set, a place for us to log all of that data and kind of record that as a long-term study. Ben, Councillor Burton.
Thanks. Probably not one to answer now, but more of a kind of an ask is that this will take you within 10 years of the target for 2038 for net zero. So it's how bold are you going to be with kind of ambitions for what things you're going to achieve by the end of this, or what we're not going to be doing during that period. So really, if you fit a boiler in 2028, you're not going to be replacing it by 2038. So really you need to be saying no boilers. Things like new roads, even things like petrol station infrastructure really is irrelevant by 2038 on this target. So it's how bold are those ambitions going to be in terms of what we're asking people to do by the end of this period, because it's not very long left after then, I guess, to actually the 2038 bit, which is always a difficult question to ask because we're not everyone's sure how they make 2038, but there does need to be quite big mid-term targets to actually get to that point, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, there is work ongoing at the moment to kind of understand how bold and how brave we can actually be within the next 4 years. You know, we will try and push the envelope as much as we're able to within constraints that we have. But I think the whole engagement process that we're going to be going through as part of kind of the next stage of development of the work be really crucial to kind of understand how far we can push that dial, particularly in terms of how partners can kind of come with us on that journey and support us in our ambitions to do what needs to be done to get towards our 2038 target. In the end, it's not just combined authorities or local authorities that need to kind of work together to get to that target. It's the collective West Yorkshire and beyond that really gets us to where we need to be. So it'll be very much kind of a work in progress to see how far we can push on some of those things over the next few months or so.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you. Just to follow on from that, really, I think it's relevant, and the papers within the remit of the committee here are all kind of interconnected, aren't they? So sorry to be on the same theme all the time, but the Home Energy West Yorkshire retrofit programme, for example, is another way where we might be able to set standards in terms of the environmental performance of our buildings, and particularly with reference to our 180,000 social rented houses. Again, another theme that I seem to be repeating, but I think, you know, the EPCC rating standard that we're aiming for at the moment is not going to deliver our 2038 target at all. So is this another area where we might be able to, through this committee or through the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, impose a higher standard of retrofit? And also, following on from that, at 3.30, it explicitly mentions, you know, building new homes, acknowledging that if we build new homes now that will need retrofitting almost as soon as they're built, if we're going to meet zero carbon targets by 2038, is not a sensible way to proceed. So we do actually need to try and find a way to impose higher standards, not just in retrofit, but also on new build. Again, higher standards in terms of the design, but also higher standards in terms of the way that we verify that design's been delivered. So in terms of post-construction certification. Thanks.
Thank you. Stephen?
Just one observation actually on that, because I think there was a point of, you know, don't let perfect get in the way of good, the old saying. I think there is a point of some of the technology that can be used as well as retrofit. I think it was here where somebody said it was 30,000 to 25, 30,000 to retrofit an old house to get it where it needs to be. Yeah. But something like a Hive or a Tardo that can reduce, you know, consumption in a house by 25% and cost less than 1,000 seems like it should be something that we consider as well. So something that helps from a technology point of view, and using, like perhaps we've done with the solar, a kind of bulk buying scheme to say, you know, we can bulk buy however many thousands of Tardos, you can get them 25% off. Seems like quite a quick win for, you know, for a combined authority. Quite a coup, I would have thought. So yeah, just throwing it out there, just open it up to technology and other things that, you know, let's take 10%. It might not be 50, but let's take 10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to say, you know, that point around, you know, like trying to go for perfect, kind of not making us not get in the way of kind of just making those moves and those changes. I think on that particular point around homes and retrofit, I think it will be that suite of measures that will ultimately get us there. We know already that we have various levels of acceptance of people coming into people's homes and doing different works and those types of things. So we know from that we will have to have a differing of approaches in terms of technologies, how far we push the envelope, cost. You know, we do have a lot of heritage kind of buildings. They provide different kind of complications in terms of retrofit. You know, we do know we've got some work to do in terms of how we balance out things around prices of gas and electricity that might help with some of that. So it's all part of a bigger envelope in terms of the types of solution and options that we have available to us. And I don't think anything is really off the table in terms of how we push that through and move forward on that agenda.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments, feedback? Excellent. So the recommendation then is the committee is asked to note the contents of the report and provide feedback on the draft framework and action areas for the refreshed West Yorkshire Climate and Environment Plan. So before we go to the date of the next meeting, I'd like to say a big thank you to Andy Wallhead. It's his last Place Housing and Regeneration meeting today as he's stepping down as chair of the West Yorkshire Housing Partnership. So thank you for your service, Andy. And the date of the next meeting is going to be the 6th of March 2025. With that, that's the end of the formal meeting. Thank you.
Brilliant, Chair.